Welcome back to the TelecomTV Open RAN Summit and our live Q&A show. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and this is the second of 2 live Q&A shows. It's your final chance to ask questions on all things Open RAN. Now, earlier today we held a panel discussion that looked at how telcos can maximise the value of the RIC for network efficiency gains. That is, once I've worked out the differences between non-real-time, near-real-time, X-apps, R-apps. We do like to think things so complicated, don't we? Now, if you haven't yet sent in a question, and many of you have, then please do so now and use the Q&A form that's right there on the website. And as always, your co-host for our Q&A show is Ray Lemaitre, Editorial Director here at TelecomTV. Ray, you've been out and about filming for the Open RAN show, and last week you visited the I14Y Lab Summit in Berlin. We've just seen your interview with industry veteran Patrick Lopez, who gave us a refreshing take on the RIC. But what was the mood of the Open RAN community like in Berlin?
Yes, well, thanks, Guy. Well, I mean, it was interesting for a number of reasons, but mainly because it's clear that the Open RAN community is, compared with a year ago, much more spread across the old Gartner hype cycle graph. Some people are still stuck with the inflated expectations. A few are definitely in the trough of disillusionment, though they tend to share their thoughts in private only, and some are on the slope of enlightenment with more realistic timescales and expectations for Open RAN. But it's clear also that while there's a willingness to collaborate and cooperate, there's also still a lot of resources and effort being wasted across the Open RAN sector, especially in terms of duplication of effort in testing and validation. And that's something the whole industry would benefit from if it can get addressed in any meaningful way. But also clearly there are some positive advances too. So don't get me wrong, I don't want to be the harbinger of Open RAN doom here.
No, we've got enough doomsayers, thank you very much. But change is never easy, as evidenced by the amount of engagement we've had with our Open RAN programs. Right, let's crack on. It's time to meet our guests who are going to help answer your questions. And joining us live on the programme today are Richard Mackenzie, who is Distinguished Engineer at BT, Lucia de Miguel Alberto, Senior Open RAN Manager at Vodafone, Constantine Polychronopoulos, Group Vice President 5G and Telco Cloud at Juniper Networks, Rimma Iontel, Chief Architect, TME Technology, Strategy and Execution Office at Red Hat, Patrick Kelly, Founder, Partner and Principal Analyst with Appledore Research, and Azita Arvani, CEO Americas for Rakuten Symphony. Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us again. Lots of audience questions today and we've got a packed panel of guests. Ray, do you have the first question?
Yes, I do, Guy. Thanks very much. Patrick, we're going to come to you first with this one. And the question is, with Open RAN, where is the revenue growth? If an operator invests in new technology, the big question to be asked is, how will the operator pay for this? How does Open RAN lead to new revenues? Patrick, any insights on this?
Yeah, Ray, building a business case for Open RAN is really less about the revenue generation. It's more about delivering agile services more efficiently. But in that context, if we look at revenue generation, one of the things that sort of comes up is effectively dealing with infill coverage. So if you look at rural broadband, that's one example. The other is obviously private enterprise services. So addressing that opportunity. One of the things I'll just comment on, if you're a large opco, let's say somebody like a Vodafone or Telenor, where you've got multiple operating units in different countries, your requirements are not vanilla-based requirements. So each country has specific requirements. And I think what Open RAN does is it addresses a standards-based approach without waiting on solutions maybe from a few key suppliers in the market. So each of the opcos in each country can launch some of these services independently based on local market requirements. So I think those are sort of the key, if you will, business cases that are driving investment in Open RAN.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. And Azita, let's come to you on this. Do you think there's a strong return on investment story for operators investing in Open RAN?
Hi, Ray. Yes, I absolutely think there is a big return on investment, and it kind of comes into two flavors, right? One is, how do I run my network much more efficiently? And Open RAN gives you that, both in terms of savings on your capital expenses and your operating expenses. And so whether you go to the COTS hardware, which lowers your OPEX, your CAPEX, or whether you bring automation in, which lowers your support staff. So that, and the flexibility that you're introducing new network functions much more easily. If you take those savings, and you can either return it to your subscribers, your customers, in terms of lowering the service plan rates, or you could put it back into modernizing the network more. But more importantly than that, so that's the first layer, that service agility enables you, and the cloud nativeness enables you to bring more cost efficiency to the network. But on top of that, we can take that service agility and the cloud native platform that we've built for our network, and bring in new services on top. And so that's, for example, what we've done at Rakuten Mobile, to bring in more communication services, more over-the-top collaboration services, and commerce services, and we keep adding to that. So we think that revenue generation piece of it, taking advantage of the underlying cloud-native foundation, and bringing in that service agility, that actually is another way that Open RAN pays for itself.
Okay, thanks very much, Azita. Constantine, you wanted to come in on this one as well.
Yes, I agree with what Azita said and what Patrick covered. Pretty much cases that address primarily OPEX and CAPEX savings. But when it comes to opening up opportunity for new revenue streams, right, for operators, I think there is great potential there. The technology and the adoption will have to mature before we enable new business models, like, as Patrick mentioned, the private sector, private mobile, Industry 4.0 applications that are not possible in today's networks, right? The RIC and ORAN, the ORAN architecture enables that, enables the ability to offer, for example, private mobile networks through the public network to address specific latency requirements, specific bandwidth requirements, security that can be customized, and that can be priced separately, right? So there is a whole list of new possibilities, but before operators manage to get to that point where they can monetize new services, we have to make ORAN work in the at the base case, which is again primarily OPEX and CAPEX savings.
Thanks, Constantine. And Richard from BT, did you want to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, briefly. I think Constantine said a lot of the things I was going to highlight. But in particular, it is the RIC that's the enabler for these new services to be created. And if you think about where we are today, we're still in 5G rollout. So most people who use 5G, it's still enhanced mobile broadband. And the opportunity for revenue is when you can do 5G services beyond that. And that's why you need this flexible architecture, so that when you are at the point of realizing there's an opportunity here, or we've got some customers there, you've already got the actual infrastructure in place and the Open RAN flexibility that you can then, via the RIC, very rapidly create and launch that service. So the new revenue could be something that we've already thought of, like the private networks opportunities, neutral hosts, another big area for us in the UK. But there's going to be other things we haven't thought about, and that's exactly what we're anticipating, and that's why we want this flexible architecture. So yeah, I think it is tough. It's is there an opportunity while we're just doing enhanced mobile broadband? It is just a case of traditional architectures can do it, Open RAN can do it. So then it does come down to these issues of, is there a cost saving rather than a new revenue?
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Richard. Yes, and there's no doubt that as the RAN intelligent controller and those associated apps are developed over the years, hopefully sooner rather than later, that we might start to find out what some of these unknown services are and see how they float in the market. Okay, great. Thanks. Good responses to the first question, but we've got loads to get through, so I'm going to hand back over to Guy.
Yep, thank you, Ray. Before we get to the second question, I just want to respond to a comment that we've just received from a viewer who asks, will there be a replay of this? Yes, there will be. In about 24 hours time, all our programs from this year's Open RAN Summit will be available on demand later. Right, next audience question. Lucia, let me try and put this one to you first. This is a question which asks, what will be the likely impact of Open RAN on telco deployments in the next 5 years? Is Open RAN a 25% solution, 50% solution, 75%? Basically, how much of the network do you think will be taken up with Open RAN?
I think it's not a secret that at least Vodafone ambition is to use Open RAN in the 30% of the network in 2030, 6 years instead of 5 years. But it's not only ambitions from Vodafone. I think other operators and even traditional vendors are doing similar announcements where Open RAN is a global trend, where a gradual percentage beginning now to reach this 30 or even upper percentage, 40, in the next years happens. Also, I think some vendors, traditional vendors, are moving to the cloud solution, going closer to Open RAN. So at the end, Open RAN, it will be widely spread.
Great, thank you, Lucia. So answer for our audience member there, 30% at least from Vodafone, and keep watching the other operators as they roll out and for their percentages and how much of their networks are going to be Open RAN. Right, if nobody else wants to have a comment on that, then we will move the conversation along and let me hand back over to Ray.
Okay, thanks, Guy. For this next question, we're going to come to Constantine first. And the question is, why are the majority of RIC vendors focused on the non-real-time RIC solutions? Why does there appear to be less interest in developing the applications for the near real-time RIC?
Well, that's a good question. I would correct the question by saying I don't think there is lack of interest for the non-real-time RIC, but it's human nature to gravitate towards the familiar, and the non-real-time RIC represents something more familiar, more like a CSON platform, right? Everybody knows how to deploy central CSON applications. So the near real-time RIC feels like something that we can adapt. It's part of the orchestrator. Many vendors are integrating the non-real-time RIC into their orchestrator, into their automation suite. However, to bring out the benefit of ORAN, you have to have the near real-time RIC. You have to realize that without the near real-time RIC, you cannot effect localized optimization or services that focus on making to put it in simple terms, making the network to behave in particular ways or deliver specific services in only part of its geography, of its physical footprint, right? So if you don't have that ability, which is enabled by the near real-time RIC, then without, with the near real-time, the non-real-time only, whatever you do, whether it's optimization or new services or any application, you'll have to apply it across the entire network. And that's only a small part of the possibilities that Open RAN enables for us. So the near real-time RIC is absolutely necessary. It's also true that RAN vendors have not caught up yet with the Orange specifications. So, we're delaying. It's not that, there is no interest, but because of the lack of readiness on the part of, traditional RAN vendors, the adoption of the near real-time lags compared to the non-real-time.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Constantine. We've got a lot of our speakers today wanting to come in on this one, so I'm going to come to Richard first, and then we're going to make our way around today's speakers. So, Richard, what's your view on this? Is it a matter of timing? Is it the low-hanging fruit first in the non-real-time RIC before the XApps appear?
Well, just the way you've said the question, you talk about XApps, and when we talk about the features that go on the RIC, we usually say XApps rather than RApps, and XApps are for the near real-time RIC. So that's one of the things. I think there's actually a lot of attention on the near real-time RIC, and if anything, I'd say there's more examples of solutions that are just in the near real-time RIC at the moment rather than the non-real-time RIC. But across the TIP project that I'm co-chairing, which is focused on the development and commercialization of the RIC, we've got a number of vendors, and we certainly see there are some that are just focused on non-real-time RIC, some that are just on near real-time RIC, and then there are probably a similar amount that cover both. But one thing I did mention previously, when we were looking at the key use cases for the different RICs, we were saying certain optimizations were for non-real-time and others were for near real-time. And actually, when we started looking at vendor solutions or vendor implementations, they were proposing to use the other RIC than what we anticipated. So we've actually generalized the use cases to make sure that we can keep that competition and room for vendors to produce as long as they produce a solution that has the right objectives and achieves the goals, then we're happy. So I'm not sure that the situation described by the question is actually true. I think that there certainly are some vendors that are focused on non-real-time RIC, but that isn't a reflection of the entire RIC ecosystem at the moment. Okay,
interesting. Thanks, Richard. Patrick, what's your view here? I mean, are you seeing more activity on one flavor of RIC than the other?
Yeah, Ray, I would so I think David and Constantine made some good points. One of the things I just wanted to highlight is sort of this risk on, risk off. And maybe the perception, at least from the questioner's point of view, is that, non-real-time RIC is more of a situation where it's less risky, if you will. And therefore, there's a view that, okay, there's more activity going on there. On the other side, I think, if you look at near real time, you sort of have this aspect of domain level control, and Constantine was kind of pointing that out, where much faster loops, and you have capabilities there. If you're doing it at the domain level, I would expect to see a lot of opportunity there. But we haven't done really any sort of surveys or quantitative analysis to stack up non-real-time versus near real-time.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Rimma, let's come to you next before we come to Lucia.
Yeah, I wanted to expand a little on what Constantine mentioned about standards that haven't been adapted by some of the traditional vendors. What it means is that if you want to create XApps, the ones that run on real-time, near real-time RIC, it means you have to work, either you have to adapt the XApps from the vendor who is giving you the antennas, or you have to have two vendors that have a very close partnership, because for them to be able to communicate over the existing interfaces, which are potentially not standardized, one of the vendors has to be open enough to share the specs. And that's one of the limiting factors of creating more XApps by more different types of vendors. And the other aspect of that is, because you're dealing with the actual network, with your actual spectrum and your spectrum efficiency, because that's what a lot of XApps are concentrated around, there is a lot more possibility for somebody to mess up your network. So as a service provider, who do you trust when you try to utilize those XApps, and how much do you have to test XApps that are coming from a third party? And that might also affect the rate of adoption of XApps versus our apps. And that's one of the things that we've seen, and that's one of the limiting factors, I think.
Okay, great insights there, Rimma. Thanks very much. And Lucia, let's come to you next. What are you seeing from the Vodafone perspective here?
Yeah, I think, although it's difficult to complete it more, the answers of my mates from the point of view of operator Vodafone is that I think Constantine commented the non-real-time RIC is an evolution of something that we have it now, who is the distributed SON. So at the end, something that is progressive, is a progression, is more easy to introduce. And this is the reason that the operators are thinking firstly in the non-real-time RIC than the near. And also because there are a lot of application scripts more easy to migrate to our apps. Anyway, the understanding is that the near is the most disruptive, is the part that we are thinking that will be the killer part of the Open RAN. If you wanted to have a distinguish or to have a differentiation from the traditional RAN, is the near who will be the core part.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Lucia. And we'll come to Azita next, and then we'll finish off with an additional comment from Constantine. So Azita, what's your view here?
Yeah, right. So I agree with what the previous speaker said on this, just emphasizing that we think that non-real-time RIC would be easier for people in general to migrate to, not to put any less significance on near real-time. It's just a matter of complexity of it and also sensitivity of it. Complexity in terms of because of the latency issues that are happening and very low layers of radio baseband, it's much more complex to open it up to everyone, and that makes it more sensitive for having a multi-vendor or vendor agnostic type of environment. And so with near real-time, the vendors, RAN vendors, would be more sensitive to open that part up. So, but with the non-real-time, there's a lot more opportunity to bring in the your business policies into the RAN and customize it in that way. And I also think that if you look at the history, like even when you're going on networks to the cloud, we started from packet core as an industry because that was much less real time compared to the RAN. And now we're slowly moving to the RAN as an industry and the cloud native part of it. So just we see it from the way we've done it before in the telco, going with the non-real-time parts of the system into a new platform, and I think that will repeat itself here in the RIC applications too. So our apps will probably be more popular initially than X apps.
Okay, yes, great point there, Zita. Thanks very much. And Constantine, we'll just we'll close out the answers to this question with a final comment from yourself.
Yes, on an optimistic note, I just want to make sure that everybody knows the near real-time RIC is not theory, right? It's real. Lucia summed it up very well. And as a matter of fact, I can say that Juniper and Vodafone work together to demonstrate in a field trial the value of the near real-time RIC through a number of applications, including admission control, SLA, slice SLA assurance. So it's real, it's happening, yes, collaboration between RAN vendors and the RIC developers and application developers needs to happen, and testing, as Ray mentioned early on, having a way to quickly, rapidly test interoperability and validation, I think will help the industry get over the hump of adoption.
Okay, excellent. There we go. This is not theory. This is reality, and coming to a network near you maybe sometime soon. All right, great points, Constantine. Great points from everybody there. Thanks very much. At this point of the program, I'll hand back over to Guy.
Yep, thank you very much, Ray. Well, it's now time to check in on the audience poll that we run for our Open RAN Summit. As usual, it's one question with 7 answer options, and of course you can pick whichever ones you feel are the most relevant. And the question we are asking you this week is, which are the most important areas of focus for the Open RAN community during the next 12 months? And you can see the real-time votes coming in right here. So a quick scan of those figures shows that total cost of ownership is in pole position, with 61% of you thinking that is an important area of focus. And I've got to say that chimes in with last year's poll, because TCO topped last year's poll as well. Right, well look, if you haven't yet voted, you are running out of time. We're keeping the polls open until the end of today, and then Ray will take a look at the results on TelecomTV and see how they compare to last year. Right, we still have plenty of time for more questions, so right back over to you, Ray.
Okay, thanks, Guy. And TCO might be topping that poll at the moment, but very surprisingly, the creation of an expanded developer ecosystem is the option that so far had the least number of votes, which is pretty surprising, actually, I would say, given the talk about the importance of developers for the RIC here. So interesting to see what the industry thinks. Okay, let's come to the next audience question. And Richard, we're going to come to you first with this one. And the question, well, there's a very strong link here to what we've been asking about in our poll. And the question is, do the panelists think that 2 additional factors slowing down Open RAN adoption in large MNO solutions are performance parity that matches virtual RAN and scalability for carrier class networking? So are these 2 factors, in addition to what we've looked at in the poll, perhaps holding back major mobile network operator investments in Open RAN? Richard, what's your view?
Well, absolutely. I think if you've got a large deployment, you've got a lot of customers, it would be crazy. There might be examples you can think of, but I can't think of any, of an operator that would actually sacrifice performance just because there's some slightly cheaper equipment. And when I say that, by rolling out Open RAN into your large network right now, that's not necessarily that there's an open door, in the sense that we're thinking of Open RAN for 5G, and most of the large operators, they rolled out 5G several years ago. So that equipment is already deployed. It's the main opportunity to get into that large deployment is when that current equipment that's deployed gets to the end of life. So in that sense, it's the wrong time for Open RAN. And when that equipment comes to the end of life, then you've got the opportunity to say, well, who do I go with? There's plenty of reasons to go with Open RAN. Performance, ideally, would be the reason. If it can outperform traditional architectures, that's what we really look for. There could be an opportunity if it's just cheaper to deploy, but I think for a lot of the larger operators, you always want the premium performance. So you really do need that performance parity at least. And in terms of proving that it works, the scalability is a concern. We have to make sure that we've seen that it grows and it's stable as we get these larger Open RAN deployments. So I think the timing is unfortunate that 5G was launched a little bit too early for Open RAN. So it's missed the boat to be the greenfield deployment for a lot of operators. But when we look at what are the real opportunities to deploy Open RAN right now, it is greenfield opportunities. So either the larger operators with greenfield networks like Dish and Rakuten, or it's the small cell deployments that are being deployed in new areas, and that's where the private networks and the neutral host opportunities come in. So you could get those small cell deployment opportunities with the larger operators. So I would expect those to happen a lot sooner than we get the deployments in the macro network.
Okay, excellent insights there, Richard. Thanks very much. And Constantine, what are you hearing from Juniper's operator customers on this?
Yes, I want to just clarify something in the question itself, whether ORAN can reach parity with vRAN. These are 2 different things. vRAN is basically, virtualized, decoupling the hardware from the software and having virtualized functions in the network, right? It's a catalyst, it's an enabler for Open RAN. But when it comes to performance, it is ORAN and XApps and RApps that address performance and scalability of the network and efficiencies at the very core. vRAN, think of vRAN as an infrastructure evolution. ORAN is an architectural evolution that necessitates virtualization. As a matter of fact, cloud native. We don't even have to have hypervisors. We can go straight to cloud native technologies and bring out even more efficiencies in the network and lower TCO. But when it comes to scalability, demonstrating the scalability of ORAN, it comes into two flavors. Scalability in terms of being able to showcase the introduction of applications that can scale across the entire network, and scalability of the platform itself. Both of them have been demonstrated, but I agree there is a long way to go to bring the barrier down when it comes to adoption. But we're well on our way to do so.
Okay, excellent, Constantine. Thanks very much. So the market is on its way, but perhaps with certain use cases first for sure. Okay, if there are no further comments on that question, we've got plenty of questions to cover, so I'll hand back over to Guy.
Thank you, Ray. And this next question, actually, it touches on parts of Richard's answer for the previous one when Richard was talking about Greenfield here, but this is one about brownfield and greenfield. Rimma, let's come to you first for this question. The question is, who will drive the growth of Open RAN for the next decade? Will it be the brownfield or will it be the greenfield operators? And also, what will be the biggest push for brownfield operators to go commercial with mass deployments other than escaping vendor lock-in?
Well, Richard already mentioned some of the differences between the greenfield and brownfield. And also a couple of questions ago, I think we also addressed a little bit of what the motivators would be for brownfield operators to deploy ORAN, meaning agility of service, total cost of ownership, or return on investment, etc. So one thing I want to highlight is that when we talk about greenfield, first of all, there aren't that many greenfield operators. Yes, there's brownfield operators who are going into greenfield, meaning they're exploring like new places, new areas, new services. But as a fully greenfield operator, there aren't that many of them, and they'll be surprised how fast they become brownfield because the industry is moving so fast that even as you're deploying a brand new, spanking new greenfield network, some of it becomes legacy almost instantly. So I don't think you can say, oh, greenfield is going to be driving it or brownfield is going to be driving it. I think it's going to be a very coordinated effort. I think in some places, greenfield will be like a stimulator, like a catalyst, because potentially in the greenfield, people will be more open to experiment and to working with new types of vendors, while we wait for the more traditional vendors to recognize and to accept ORAN more, right, and to bring the existing equipment in accordance with the new standards, because that for them it also takes a little bit of time to develop, to redevelop, to refactor what they already have. For them it's also a huge investment. So the new areas like new greenfield operators might stimulate them, right? But the bulk, the volume is definitely going to come also from the brownfield. So if you're looking at the timeframes of 10 years, by the end of those 10 years, I fully expect to see brownfield operators be fully on board with ORAN as well. And we already talked a little bit about why. It's agility, it's cost, and also cost in new ways. We haven't touched on it yet, but we did in our panel earlier, the sustainability topics, right? When you're talking about ORAN and the RIC and what the XApps and RApps can bring to the table is a lot of the power optimization and energy efficiency that you might not get from the traditional RAN necessarily. And that's right now a huge driver, and for greenfield for sure, and even for brownfield operators who are seeing the energy bills going through the roof. So that's another motivator for them to adopt ORAN.
Great, thanks very much for those insights, Rimma. And as you say, energy efficiency is a huge factor at the moment, and also, just like my lawn, greenfield quickly becomes brownfield. Lucia, let's come across to you for some additional comments on how you see this market for ORAN being driven, and whether it's brownfield or greenfield, and what it's going to take for the brownfield operators to go into mass deployments.
I think I agree completely that it was said before. So for the brownfield operators is so important as the greenfield operators, mainly for all the benefits of the Open RAN. The main, I think, reason is to open to the innovation, but also the reduction of cost to remove, or to, I think, to remove the closeness of the traditional vendors, to be locked in with a unique vendor, and I think to be more efficient, to reduce the energy consumed. So there are so many benefits that at the end, all the operators, green or brown, they are moving with the trend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Lucia. And let's go across to Azita for her comments.
Yeah, Guy, one thing that I wanted to add, it's true that the telecom moves in waves, and in some geographies, the 5G wave may have been started before people seriously considered Open RAN as an option. But I think that a lot of geographies, the 5G has not gone through its deployment. So there's opportunities there for both greenfields and brownfields to be very proactive, considering bringing Open RAN into their networks. But I also believe that even in the brownfields where the 5G has gone through at least the early cycles of it, there are opportunities for introducing new spectrums, and so that brownfields could look at it as an overlay to the existing network for that new spectrum deployment. Of course, we talked about private networks. That will be a big deal that people might feel more comfortable about, because it's a little bit kind of creates its own greenfield environment. But also fixed wireless access, I think that's an area that when we talk about mobility, we usually don't consider that, but that's also another area that we could consider Open RAN in. The other thing I wanted to mention, that now that we have Open RAN, that a lot of greenfields can openly embrace all of it, and brownfields should also be on the notice, because this is a competitive environment, right? So if you have folks that are adopting the new technology faster, and they're able to bring that agility to their network, that accessibility to the RAN, that programmability, that customization, and not have to worry about these locked-in ecosystems, that competitive force needs to drive everyone, brownfield or greenfield, into this new way of doing things.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Azita. And we've got a couple more comments coming in for this particular question. So let me first of all go across to Patrick.
Yeah, Guy, just on the back of what Azita was discussing, I think we've seen a lot of innovation coming from Rakuten and Dish. And so, shouldn't take anything away from what they've achieved in the marketplace. But, the fact of the matter is, if you look at, operators worldwide, it's the brownfields that control 98% of the total spend in the market, global marketplace. So, as a supplier, for example, or system integrator, the value proposition really needs to be focused about some of the things that we were talking about earlier, which is, things like network optimization. We talked a little bit about energy management and things of that nature. How do you develop a compelling business case to actually move Open RAN and the capabilities of the RIC to the forefront?
Yeah, absolutely spot on there, Patrick. Thank you very much for that. And Rimma, let's come across to you quickly for some final comments on this question.
I just wanted to address an excellent point that Azita just made about other telcos. So here we are, either North America, I think, or Europe, but there are other markets. There are LATAM, there's Middle East, there's Africa, and there are a lot of much smaller service providers in those markets. For them, like if you look at the current Analyst data, while the predictions for O-RAN adoption in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific are going up, those markets are actually a bit more pessimistic. And I think one of the reasons is right now O-RAN adoption is fairly complex and you need a lot of resources to be able to adapt it into your network, because you have to do a lot of your own system integration and you have to work with many different vendors, and all of that requires resources. Plus you're testing brand new stuff, so you have to have labs to do that. And a lot of the smaller operators don't have the resources to do that. So the adoption of O-RAN in those markets would be affected by how well it gets adopted in bigger markets, because it's going to propagate. And because O-RAN, we're trying to make it more open, there's a lot more sharing of information and data. And also the vendors themselves are learning from these initiatives with bigger operators. That's going to trickle into the smaller markets. And then, the adoption is going to increase there as well. Because right now they really count on their one relationship with one vendor. Once the benefits of having Open RAN can be passed on to them as well, that's when we're going to see a much wider adoption across the whole world.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rimma. It's good to mention those points. And Ray and I regularly get questions from tier 2, tier 3 operators on these shows, which is great, and also shows the interest that they're showing and knowledge that they need as well. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Let's hand across then to Ray for our next question.
Okay, thanks, Guy. And this one we're going to come to Azita first. And the question is there a demand for creating RAN intelligent controller RIC applications for the private network market? Or is the whole model just too complicated for enterprise customers? Azita, what's your view here?
Yeah, hi, Ray. First of all, that's a great question. As we were talking earlier, the opportunity for Open RAN is wide open in private networks in general. That's an area that a lot of that programmability will come into place. A lot of that customization will come into place. And a lot of the ways that you want to run the network in terms of whether it's the non-real-time policy types of things that you want to enforce on your private network, or whether it's very near real-time, being able to really fine-tune the scheduling and optimizing for turning on and off your radios to save on power. All of those fine tunings at the lower layers of radio, and also the policy type things that you do at the non-real time, those are super important for the private networks. And you can even have much more, you can identify more use cases for that case right now. So I would say that definitely it's very important for private networks to have Open RAN in general, to have that flexibility and agility to be able to offer new services and also take advantage of the RIC, both at the lower layers for the very sensitive performance sort of sensitive type of application, latency sensitive type of applications, as well as the higher level work. In addition, the fact that in a private network, you really valuing the data a lot. So you're getting all that data and being able to run AI models on it, using X apps, using R apps, whether for training. Let's say most of your training will be done in the R apps, and the inferences will be done in X apps. I mean, those are the kinds of things that, if you're on a factory floor, warehousing, you want to be able to grab that data and be able to take advantage of in running your network. So I would say absolutely for private networks.
Okay, excellent. Great insights there, Azita. Lots of people want in on this one, so we'll come to Constantine next.
Yes, I absolutely believe that the private 5G networks, private networks in general, stand to benefit a great deal by the ORAN architecture, and specifically by the RIC, non-real-time, real-time RIC, and applications. If we think about Industry 4.0, smart cities, smart warehousing, automated assembly lines, mines, operators that operate mines very far from any sort of connectivity. That's where ORAN shines, right? Because it turns a monolithic network to a network that can shift resources on demand in real time. And you cannot have smart cities unless you have the ability to shift the network resources, starting in particular from the radio, from the access point, to where performance or where the end devices require service. Think about an automated factory, right, where you have different requirements between the users that roam around and the managers overseeing the equipment and the automated assembly lines that have robots that need reliable real-time connectivity. You have a congestion scenario. The network knows where to give resources, where to sort priorities, how to sort out priorities. That is possible only with an ORAN-like architecture, and we've got only ORAN to go by. So I absolutely believe that it's going to prove invaluable for private mobile networks.
Okay, excellent, Constantine. Thanks very much. Richard, let's come to you next. Has BT been looking at this in the UK?
Absolutely, and it's a great question because it is a challenge, but I think this is the best opportunity for Open RAN. In terms of commercializing Open RAN, a lot of the early deployment opportunities we see are within private networks. And one of the reasons is simply that when we compare it to legacy solutions, we're always trying to build a bespoke solution for each private network, and there aren't many options to choose from. But with Open RAN, if we get that ecosystem right, we can pick and choose all the components, piece them together to create your bespoke solution. And that's only going to be configured and functioning correctly in the bespoke way that you want it if we have the RIC working correctly. And so it's the RIC that's going to be the enabler of this. And when we think about what's going on in the RIC, we want to get all of the best solutions. The example Constantine was given with, factory automation. You might want ultra low latency features. We don't have many of those in the live networks today, but there could be a huge number of those going into private networks, and we could be getting functions that are deployed within third-party functions within your private network, and that's going to be deployed via the RIC. And Azita made a really good point about your data best as well. So if you've got a bespoke network, your data, how to optimize certain things or what the objectives you're trying to achieve are. You as the private network owner might actually be in the right position to make some of those third-party XApps yourself. You'll be one of the third parties. You might not want to do all of the radio configuration. That you can leave that to experts in different areas, but there'll be certain areas where you are the expert and you can now create those XApps yourself. So it really is a massive opportunity. It's probably the best way to help commercialize Open RAN in the near term. RIC is the real enabler for Open RAN to get that performance parity with traditional architectures or outperform. And so we really want to see this working, and we're putting a big effort into making sure we can coordinate Open RAN solutions for private networks.
Okay, excellent. And indeed, when people talk about innovation in Open RAN, I think this is a lot of the time, this is what they're talking about, the potential of the apps on the RAN intelligent controllers. Right, we'll come to Lucia next and then to Rimma. So Lucia.
Yeah, at the end, yeah, this is the key. For the enterprise is key, differentiation and innovation. And Open RAN and mainly the RIC, they enable it. So at the end, if we wanted to democratize for the enterprise services and to be able that they have to manage their own apps or to enable open at the end enablers, developers, you have to do with Open RAN. So, and I think hardware, open hardware, hardware normal, you open even the software to be able that the enterprise are able to manage and their own necessities and applications.
Okay, thank you, Lucia. And Rimma, I think we'll come to you and probably what will be the final comment for today, as the clock is ticking down pretty quickly. So Rimma, the final comment on the use of RIC in private networks.
And I'm going to finish it in a true Red Hat fashion, advocating for developers. So part of the question was, is it too complex for enterprises? And it's really up to us to make it not be too complex for enterprises, to create the environments and to create resources for the enterprise developers to learn how to develop the applications for these for RICs, and also how to run them and how to differentiate their own industry or their own enterprises using those apps, right? Because just like service providers are trying to create their own differentiators, each enterprise is also trying to find ways to make themselves unique and to derive some benefits from all the new technologies. So if you create development environments, tools, portals that they can consume to make it easy for them to adapt to this new platform, that's going to make their lives easier and it's going to benefit the service providers as well.
Okay, excellent point there, Rimma. Okay, fantastic. Great set of answers to that question. And actually, while we were talking there, we even had a couple more questions come in about private networks, but hopefully those comments help to answer those. Guy, I'll hand back over to you at this point.
Yep, thank you very much, Ray. We are out of time now, so thank you to all of our guests who joined us for this live programme, and of course to our audience for sending in those questions. We could only answer a few questions, but hopefully a lot of your questions have been covered in the answers and responses. Well, that is a wrap for this year's Open RAN Summit. Ray and I will be back in September for the Cloud Native Telco Summit. That's after our contractually agreed mid-season break at a luxury all-inclusive resort. Separate suites, of course.
Separate? Oh, I didn't know that. Thanks, Guy. But before that, before the summer, there's another edition of the Open RAN Show. The episode, as the youngsters say, drops on Friday the 30th of June, and you can see a full report from the recent i14Y Labs Summit with quite a few slope of enlightenment insights being shared.
Oh, I like the sound of that. And Cloud Native Telco back for its 5th year. Can you believe that? In the meantime, do keep watching TelecomTV for your regular fix of Open RAN and much, much more. Goodbye for now.